Hey y'all, Charles Madison, Nexxlegacy Radio, here for a news report talking about the forgotten radio bill that changed airwaves forever. So listen, in the mid-1990s, a piece of legislation quietly signed into law by then-President Bill Clinton reshaped the landscape of American radio, and its effects are still being felt today. Though often overshadowed by other political milestones, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 proved to be one of the most consequential bills for the broadcast industry in U.S. history. So what was this forgotten bill? Listen, it was signed into 1996. That Telecommunications Act was a sweeping overhaul of communications law, the first of its kind in over 60 years. Its most dramatic change was to remove long-standing limits on how many radio stations a single company could own, both nationally and in local markets. Before the act, a broadcaster could own a handful of stations. Afterwards, corporations could buy dozens, hundreds or more. Was it boom or bust then? Almost immediately after the law took effect, a wave of mergers and acquisitions swept the industry. Major broadcasters like Clear Channel, which is now iHeartMedia, Infinity, and others bought up small independent stations across the nation. In just a few years, the number of individual radio owners shrank dramatically, while a handful of media conglomerates came to dominate listenership and revenue. Supporters argued the act would create competition and allow modernization and a few new technologies, but critics, artists, and independent broadcasters saw a very different outcome. Homogenized playlists, central programming, and far fewer opportunities for local talent and local voices. So, did this bill mark the beginning or the end of mainstream radio? From a cultural standpoint, many insiders and observers argue that yes, this was a turning point. With large corporations at the helm, decision-making about which songs got airplay shifted from local DJs and station programmers to national consultants, market research teams, and corporate playlists. The shift didn't create pay-for-play out of thin air. It did. Payola was already illegal and regulated. But the new industry structure made room for more subtle forms of paid promotion and influence. Artists and labels found themselves negotiating with national promoters and conglomerates if they wanted airplay across hundreds of stations. An old idea was purely merit-based. Rotation became harder to argue for. So look, when did pay-for-play become normal then? Well, the post-1996 consolidation didn't immediately transform every station into a pay-for-play outlet, but it did create an environment where promotional budgets and label relationships could outweigh grassroots local momentum as well. With fewer independent voices and standardized playlists defined by corporate strategy rather than community taste, pay-for-play effectively became part of the commercial ecosystem, even if it remained legally restricted. Investigations in the early 2000s into alleged payola practices highlighted how the biggest radio companies and their promotion partners were operating in an increasingly commercialized space, with critics saying the deregulated market made abuses more common. Now, did the act kill enthusiasm and the energy of radio back in the day? The sense of loss among many listeners and broadcasters, it was real, not just merely nostalgia. Before 1996, dozens of locally owned stations curated varied sounds tailored to their communities, breaking new artists, and keeping local culture alive on the dial. After deregulation, that diversity gave way to centralized decisions, tight rotation playlists, and a perception that the magic of radio had faded. Yet it's important to note that radio didn't die. It evolved, actually, though perhaps not in the way many have hoped. Public, community, and low-power FM stations continue to thrive in pockets. Digital streaming and podcasting have flipped the gap left by homogenized commercial radio, and some stations retain their identity and connection with listeners even today. So what is that legacy of 1996 then? So, the Telecommunications Act was never just a radio bill. It was a broad communications overhaul designed for a new media age. But in its wake, it reshaped the heartbeat of American radio for better and worse, unleashing industry consolidation while dimming some of the local spark that once defined the airwaves. And as we look back after 30 years, the question remains not just what was lost, but what the audience and broadcasters have fought to preserve and reinvent.